If you spend enough time online, you've probably heard the warnings. The US dollar is on the brink of total collapse, soon to be replaced overnight by a new BRICS alliance currency. It's called de-dollarization, and the panic around it is everywhere. That anxiety comes from a very real place. This chart shows the US dollar's share of global foreign exchange reserves over 2 decades. In 2001, the dollar made up about 72% of world central bank reserves. Today, that dropped to roughly 57%. To hedge against that decline, global central banks are actively diversifying. They are buying up gold at a historic pace, purchasing more than 1,000 tons of the metal in each of the last 3 years. At the same time, major economic powers are building systems to bypass the dollar entirely. Russia and China, for instance, now settle roughly 90% of their bilateral trade using their own local currencies instead of dollars. The data confirms that the dollar's dominance is mathematically eroding. But treating this like an impending overnight apocalypse ignores how reserve currencies actually fade away. Macroeconomists track a historical pattern known as the Big Cycle. It maps the financial rise and fall of empires, and it reveals a harsh truth. Every single globally dominant reserve currency in history has eventually lost its crown. In the 1600s, the Dutch guilder was the absolute ruler of the global financial system, backing trade across the known world before eventually collapsing under immense war debts. By the 1800s, the British pound had taken its place. It reigned supreme as the undisputed currency of international trade, until Britain could no longer manage the financial strain of 2 world wars. The modern monetary system we know today was officially born right here, at the 1944 Bretton Woods Conference. This is the exact moment the United States claimed the throne, positioning the dollar as the anchor for global exchange. Holding that top spot grants a nation something called the exorbitant privilege. Because everyone in the world needs your currency to buy oil and settle cross-border trades, you can borrow massive amounts of money at artificially low interest rates. But that privilege comes with a lethal side effect. It mathematically forces the host nation into an unavoidable economic trap, triggering a paradox known as the Triffin dilemma. The Triffin dilemma works like this. To supply the entire world with enough dollars to keep international trade functioning, the United States has to constantly export cash. To do that, it is structurally required to buy more foreign goods than it sells, running permanent, massive trade deficits. Over decades, funding those deficits means the host nation has to borrow increasingly unsustainable sums of money from the very foreign countries it is buying from. Eventually, an economic crisis hits. When the host nation can no longer easily manage those mounting debts, the central bank is forced to intervene by printing massive amounts of new money just to keep the system afloat. Historically, this emergency printing triggers 3 distinct consequences. The currency rapidly loses its purchasing power, the domestic wealth gap drastically widens, and rising geopolitical rivals use the instability to strengthen their own positions. The United States is currently exhibiting every one of these late-stage symptoms. The math confirms that the dollar has entered its natural phase of structural decline. While public anxiety focuses on an overnight crash, history points to a much slower bleed. When the British pound lost its reserve status, the descent from peak dominance to irrelevance took roughly 50 years to complete. For a currency to truly collapse, there has to be a viable alternative ready to take its place. When we examine the current global contenders, there is no immediate successor capable of taking the dollar's job. This chart tracks the currency composition of global reserves. The blue line represents the euro. Despite being a major competitor, its shares stagnated below 25%. Meanwhile, the red line shows the US dollar remaining dominant, even with a downward trajectory. The Chinese yuan is structurally incapable of taking over right now. It holds a mere 3% of global reserves, severely limited by Beijing's strict capital controls that prevent money from moving freely across its borders. Despite political posturing and publicized summit meetings, a unified BRICS currency is entirely theoretical. A shared money supply between these nations simply does not exist. Without a viable heir waiting in the wings, the global financial system isn't facing a sudden overnight collapse. Instead, we are watching a slow, chaotic fragmentation into a multipolar economy. Because this process spans decades, you can confidently ignore the sensationalist financial grifters selling doomsday survival kits. Their entire business model relies on the false premise of an apocalyptic crash. However, proactively adjusting to this new reality is necessary. Holding a sensible allocation of gold makes mathematical sense, as it has historically proven to be a reliable reserve diversifier during periods of monetary transition. It is also practical to diversify investment portfolios with international developed equities. As the dollar gradually weakens, these foreign stocks become more valuable in dollar terms, capturing the upside of stronger local currencies. Investors should be incredibly cautious holding long-term U.S. Treasury bonds. A structurally lower global demand for dollars means the U.S. will have to offer higher interest yields to attract buyers, a dynamic that destroys the value of existing long-term bonds. Finally, prioritize real assets. Assets like real estate, essential raw commodities, and global infrastructure consistently outperform cash during ongoing currency debasement. Surviving the decline of the U.S. dollar does not require betting against the American economy. It simply requires recognizing the true historical timeline of this transition and preparing for a gradual evolution.